The sun was shining brightly over Buckingham Palace, casting golden rays onto the pristine white stone walls and gleaming statues that surrounded it. Tourists from every corner of the globe had gathered in front of the iconic building, cameras clicking away as they tried to capture memories of their visit. Families posed for photos, couples held hands while admiring the grandeur, and children pointed excitedly at the red-uniformed royal guards standing tall like living statues. Among the crowd were 5 young tourists, 3 men and 2 women, who stood out because of their loud laughter and carefree attitude. They wore matching backpacks and colorful sunglasses, clearly here for a good time rather than to soak in history or tradition. Their energy was infectious, drawing smiles from nearby visitors who assumed they were just another group enjoying their holiday. But there was something mischievous about them, a glint in their eyes that hinted at trouble brewing beneath their cheerful exteriors. As they moved closer to one of the royal guards stationed near the palace gates, the contrast between the disciplined soldier and the boisterous group became impossible to ignore. The guard, dressed in his striking scarlet tunic and bearskin hat, stood perfectly still, his posture rigid and his gaze fixed straight ahead. His presence commanded respect, yet the tourists seemed more amused than awestruck. One of them nudged another, whispering something that made the entire group giggle uncontrollably. "Look how serious he is," one of the men joked loudly, pointing at the guard. "He hasn't even blinked once. Do you think he's real?" Another member of the group playfully waved a hand in front of the guard's face, but the soldier didn't flinch. This only fueled their amusement further. "Wow, he's like a robot," one of the women remarked, pulling out her phone to take a video. "Let's see if we can make him crack." Their antics drew curious stares from other tourists. Some chuckled along, thinking it was all harmless fun, while others frowned, sensing that things might soon cross a line. A mother holding her child's hand shook her head disapprovingly, muttering under her breath about showing respect. Still, no one intervened. Not yet. After all, what harm could a little teasing do? But then the group huddled together, whispering excitedly as though plotting something bigger. One of them pulled scarves from their backpacks, twirling them dramatically like props in a comedy show. Another rummaged through their bag and produced a belt, holding it up with a grin. It was clear they weren't planning to stop at mere jokes anymore. They had decided to take their prank to the next level. And as they closed in on the unsuspecting guard, none of them realized how quickly their lighthearted game would spiral into something far more serious. The group of tourists, now emboldened by their earlier antics, crept closer to the royal guard with a mix of excitement and bravado. Their laughter had turned into hushed whispers as they finalized their plan, each member nodding eagerly in agreement. One of them clutched the scarves tightly in their hands, while another held the belt like a tool for some elaborate prank. They glanced around furtively, half expecting someone to step in and stop them, but no one did. The crowd continued watching, some amused, others confused, but none willing to intervene just yet. With surprising speed and coordination, the group sprang into action. 2 of them moved behind the guard, who remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his towering bearskin hat. Another stood in front of him, waving exaggeratedly to distract any onlookers who might question what was happening. Within seconds, the scarves were wrapped loosely around the guard's torso, securing him to the ornate iron pole beside him. The belt followed, cinching the makeshift bindings tighter. It wasn't done maliciously or aggressively. They were careful not to hurt him. But it was clear they wanted to push the boundaries of their prank as far as possible. As soon as they stepped back to admire their handiwork, the entire group erupted into laughter. "Oh my gosh, this is hilarious," one of the women exclaimed, doubling over with giggles. Her phone was already out, capturing every angle of the scene. Another snapped photos, striking silly poses next to the bound guard, as if he were part of their vacation souvenir. The men exchanged high fives, congratulating themselves on pulling off such a daring stunt. To them, it was all fun and games, a story they'd tell their friends back home about how they once tied up a real-life royal guard. But not everyone shared their amusement. Nearby, a middle-aged man shook his head in disbelief, muttering something about respect under his breath. A teenage girl filming the spectacle lowered her camera, looking uneasy as she realized the prank might not be as harmless as it seemed. Even some of the other tourists began whispering among themselves, debating whether someone should step forward and put an end to it. Yet, despite the growing tension, no one made a move. Not yet. Meanwhile, the guard remained motionless, his composure unshaken even as the bindings tightened around him. His training kicked in, reminding him that breaking posture would only escalate the situation. He couldn't afford to react, no matter how absurd or frustrating the circumstances became. But inside, his mind raced. Who were these people? What did they hope to achieve by doing this? And most importantly, when would help arrive? Though his face betrayed nothing, his thoughts churned with quiet determination. This wasn't just about him. It was about protecting the dignity of the institution he represented. For the tourists, however, none of that mattered at the moment. They were too caught up in their own excitement, oblivious to the ripple effect their actions were creating. Little did they know, their harmless prank was about to attract far more attention than they ever anticipated. And not the kind they wanted. Though the tourists reveled in their prank, completely unaware of the gravity of their actions, the royal guard stood frozen in time, both physically and mentally. To an outsider, he appeared as stoic as ever, his back straight, his chin slightly raised, and his eyes fixed on a distant point ahead. But beneath the surface, his mind was anything but calm. Years of rigorous training had prepared him for countless scenarios, but this was unlike anything he'd encountered before. Being tied to a pole by strangers was not part of the drill manual, yet here he was, caught in a bizarre situation that tested not only his discipline but also his patience. Inside, his thoughts raced like a storm brewing on the horizon. He knew better than to move or react. He couldn't risk breaking protocol, no matter how absurd the circumstances became. The scarves and belt binding him weren't painfully tight, but they were enough to restrict his movement slightly, making the act feel even more humiliating. His pride stung, though he refused to let it show. Every laugh from the tourists, every flash of a camera, felt like a jab at the honor of his position. These weren't just random people having fun. They were mocking something far greater than himself, the centuries-old tradition of the royal guards, symbols of duty, loyalty, and respect. Still, despite the chaos swirling around him, the guard clung to one unwavering truth. Help would come. He trusted his fellow soldiers implicitly, knowing they wouldn't tolerate such disrespect for long. In his mind, he visualized the scene unfolding. The commanding officer receiving word of the disturbance, the squad mobilizing with precision, and the swift resolution that would follow. Until then, his job was simple: remain steadfast. No matter how uncomfortable or frustrating the moment became, he had to hold his ground. That was what being a royal guard meant. It wasn't just about standing tall in ceremonial uniform. It was about embodying resilience under pressure. As the seconds ticked by, the weight of the situation began to settle over him. He noticed the murmurs among the crowd growing louder, some voices laced with concern while others carried hints of disapproval. A few onlookers tried to intervene verbally, urging the pranksters to stop, but their words fell on deaf ears. The guard silently appreciated these attempts, even if they didn't change his predicament. At least there were still people who understood the importance of respecting boundaries. Despite the mounting tension, the guard found solace in his role. He reminded himself why he chose this path: to serve, to protect, and to uphold traditions that stretched back generations. This small act of defiance against him wouldn't erase the significance of his uniform or diminish the pride he felt wearing it. If anything, it strengthened his resolve. With each passing second, he grew more determined to see this through without faltering. After all, the true measure of strength wasn't in reacting impulsively. It was in staying composed when faced with adversity. Unbeknownst to the tourists, their laughter and carefree attitude masked the fact that they were playing with fire. They thought they were merely amusing themselves, but they had unknowingly triggered a chain reaction that would soon bring consequences far beyond their expectations. For now, though, the guard remained silent and immovable, trusting that justice and reinforcements would arrive sooner rather than later. As the tourists continued their antics, tying the royal guard to the pole and snapping photos like it was some sort of game, the mood among the onlookers began to shift. At first, many had watched with mild amusement, assuming the prank would end quickly and without incident. But as the minutes dragged on, the atmosphere grew tense. What started as harmless fun now felt disrespectful, even reckless. The laughter from the group echoed louder, almost mocking, and it grated on the nerves of those who understood the gravity of what was happening. A middle-aged woman standing nearby couldn't contain her frustration any longer. "This isn't funny anymore," she said sharply, glaring at the pranksters. Her voice cut through the noise, causing a few heads to turn. "You're disrespecting him, and everything he stands for. Do you even realize that?" The tourists froze for a moment, caught off guard by the sudden confrontation. One of them shrugged dismissively, replying, "It's just a joke. Relax." But their tone lacked conviction, betraying a flicker of doubt about whether they'd gone too far. Others in the crowd began to voice their disapproval as well. A father holding his young daughter's hand stepped forward, shaking his head. "Teach your kids to respect people who serve our country," he said firmly, pointing at the guard. His words struck a chord with several bystanders, who nodded in agreement. Even some of the other tourists, those who had been quietly observing until now, started whispering amongst themselves, criticizing the pranksters' behavior. "They've crossed a line," one man muttered under his breath, pulling out his phone to record the scene. He wasn't alone. Others began filming too, not to join in the mockery, but to document the escalating situation. Meanwhile, an elderly gentleman wearing a tweed jacket approached the group cautiously. His voice was calm but stern as he addressed them. "Young folks, this isn't right," he said, gesturing toward the bound guard. "These men dedicate their lives to protecting us and maintaining order. This is no way to treat someone in uniform." For a brief moment, the pranksters looked uneasy, exchanging hesitant glances. Perhaps they hadn't considered the deeper implications of their actions, or maybe they simply didn't care. But the growing chorus of criticism made it clear that public opinion was turning against them. Despite the mounting backlash, the group tried to brush it off, laughing nervously and insisting they meant no harm. "We're just having fun," one of them protested weakly, though their forced smiles betrayed their unease. Another added, "He's not even moving. It's fine." But their excuses rang hollow, especially when a young couple nearby chimed in. "Fun doesn't mean humiliating someone," the woman said, her arms crossed. "Would you think it's okay if someone did this to you? Or to a police officer back home?" The tension reached a tipping point when a teenager in the crowd shouted, "Call the cops." His voice carried urgency, prompting several people to pull out their phones and dial emergency numbers. The pranksters noticed this and exchanged panicked looks, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control. Their earlier bravado began to crumble as they glanced around, seeing disapproving faces everywhere. For the first time since they tied up the guard, they seemed unsure of themselves. Amidst the chaos, the guard remained motionless, his expression unchanged. Yet the murmurs of support from the crowd likely gave him a sense of reassurance. People were speaking up, not just for him, but for the values he represented. Respect, dignity, and honor weren't outdated concepts. They mattered deeply to those who witnessed the scene unfold. And as the sound of distant boots echoed closer, signaling the arrival of reinforcements, the pranksters finally understood that their so-called joke had consequences far greater than they could have imagined. The sound of heavy boots striking the pavement echoed through the square, cutting through the chaos like a thunderclap. Heads turned in unison as a squad of royal guards marched toward the scene with military precision. Their synchronized steps were deliberate and commanding, each movement radiating authority. The tourists, who had been laughing and posing for photos just moments earlier, suddenly froze, their smiles vanishing as they realized the gravity of what was unfolding. The once carefree atmosphere transformed into something far more serious. At the front of the group was the commanding officer, his presence impossible to ignore. His stern expression and piercing gaze swept over the area, taking in the bound guard, the scarves tied around the pole, and the guilty faces of the pranksters. Without hesitation, he barked an order, his voice sharp and authoritative. Two guards broke formation and moved swiftly to free their comrade, working efficiently to untie the scarves and belt that held him in place. The rest of the squad fanned out, forming a protective perimeter around the scene to ensure no one could flee or interfere further. As the bindings were removed, the bound guard finally shifted slightly, adjusting his posture after being restrained for several minutes. Though he remained composed, there was a subtle sense of relief in the way he straightened his uniform and resumed his official stance. To anyone watching, it was clear that his dignity had been restored. But the situation was far from over. The commanding officer stepped forward, addressing the pranksters directly. His tone was firm but controlled as he explained the seriousness of their actions. "You have disrespected not only this individual but also the institution he represents," the officer said, his words carrying weight. "This is not entertainment. This is misconduct." The tourists exchanged nervous glances, their earlier bravado completely gone. One of them opened their mouth to protest, perhaps to insist it was just a joke, but the commanding officer silenced them with a single raised hand. It was clear there would be no excuses accepted here. Meanwhile, the crowd of onlookers watched intently, some nodding in approval at the swift response, while others whispered among themselves about what might happen next. A few even clapped softly, showing support for the guards and their handling of the situation. The pranksters, now visibly uneasy, began to shuffle backward, likely hoping to slip away unnoticed. But the squad's formation left no room for escape. Every exit was blocked, every attempt at retreat thwarted by the disciplined line of soldiers standing firm. Within minutes, police officers arrived on the scene, summoned by concerned citizens who had called for help. They quickly assessed the situation, speaking briefly with the commanding officer before turning their attention to the pranksters. Handcuffs appeared, glinting in the sunlight as the officers prepared to take action. The mood grew even tenser as the reality sank in. This wasn't just a harmless prank anymore. It was now a legal matter. One by one, the tourists were questioned and then led away, their colorful outfits and sunglasses contrasting sharply with the somber expressions on their faces. Some tried to explain themselves, stammering apologies and claiming they hadn't meant any harm. Others remained silent, staring at the ground as if hoping it would swallow them whole. Cameras flashed as news crews arrived, capturing the moment for broadcast later that evening. The pranksters' faces would soon be seen by millions, a stark reminder of how quickly a lighthearted act could spiral into something far more consequential. For the remaining crowd, the arrival of reinforcements brought a sense of closure. Justice had been served, or at least the first steps toward it had been taken. As the squad reformed and returned to their posts, the bound guard gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to his comrades. It was a gesture of gratitude, acknowledging their unity and unwavering support. Though the incident had disrupted the usual calm of Buckingham Palace, it also reinforced the respect and discipline that defined the royal guards. And as the tourists were escorted away, it became clear that their reckless behavior would leave a lasting impression, not just on them, but on everyone who witnessed the events of that day. Inside the police station, the mood was tense and somber. The once boisterous tourists now sat in a sterile, brightly lit room, their colorful outfits and carefree attitudes replaced by slumped shoulders and nervous glances. Handcuffs dangled from their wrists, clinking softly whenever they shifted in their seats. The reality of their actions had finally sunk in, and the weight of it pressed down on them like a heavy blanket. Gone were the laughs, the playful teasing, and the sense of invincibility that had fueled their prank earlier that day. Now, they faced the consequences head-on. The questioning began almost immediately. Two officers took turns speaking with each member of the group, asking for names, nationalities, and detailed accounts of what had happened at Buckingham Palace. At first, the tourists tried to downplay their behavior, insisting it had all been a harmless joke. One of them, a young man with tousled hair and a sheepish grin, leaned forward and said, "We didn't mean anything by it. We thought it'd be funny. A story to tell our friends back home." But the officer across the table wasn't amused. His expression remained stern as he replied, "Funny doesn't involve tying up someone who's serving their country." Another member of the group, a woman wearing oversized sunglasses perched on top of her head, chimed in nervously. "It was just supposed to be lighthearted fun," she stammered, twisting her hands together. "We didn't realize it would get this serious." Her voice trailed off as she realized how weak her defense sounded. Across the room, one of her companions buried his face in his hands, muttering under his breath about how stupid they'd been. For the first time, they seemed to grasp the magnitude of their actions. Not only had they disrespected a royal guard, but they had also embarrassed themselves on an international stage. As the hours passed, the group began to fracture under the pressure. Some expressed genuine remorse, apologizing repeatedly, and promising never to repeat such behavior. "I feel awful," admitted one of the women, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't think about how it might affect him or what it meant to everyone else watching. I'm so sorry." Others, however, remained defensive, clinging to the idea that they hadn't done anything truly wrong. "People take things too seriously," grumbled one of the men, crossing his arms defiantly. "It's not like we hurt anyone." Meanwhile, outside the interrogation rooms, news of the incident spread like wildfire. Social media platforms lit up with videos and photos captured by onlookers at Buckingham Palace. Hashtags like #RespectTheGuard and #TouristShame trended globally, sparking heated debates about cultural sensitivity and appropriate behavior while traveling abroad. Back in their home countries, local news outlets picked up the story, airing clips of the prank alongside commentary from experts and commentators. Friends and family members of the tourists recognized their faces, flooding their social media profiles with messages ranging from disbelief to outright anger. "How could you do something so disrespectful?" Read one scathing comment beneath a vacation photo posted just days earlier. By the time the officers finished gathering statements, charges had been filed against the group. They were formally accused of public disorder and harassment, offenses that carried potential fines and even jail time depending on the court's decision. As they were led out of the station later that evening, cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing every step. Reporters shouted questions, but the tourists kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact. The walk to the waiting police van felt endless, each stride heavier than the last. For the royal guards, the incident served as both a challenge and a testament to their professionalism. While the pranksters' actions had momentarily disrupted their routine, the swift response from the squad demonstrated unity and resolve. In interviews conducted afterward, representatives from Buckingham Palace emphasized the importance of respecting traditions and institutions, reminding visitors that humor should never come at the expense of others' dignity or the law. As for the tourists, their fleeting moment of amusement had turned into a life lesson they wouldn't soon forget, one that underscored the importance of thinking before acting and considering the impact of their choices on those around them. The days following the incident at Buckingham Palace were a whirlwind of reflection, accountability, and public scrutiny for the tourists involved. Back in their home countries, the story dominated headlines, with newspapers and television programs dissecting every detail of what had happened. The images of the prank, captured on camera by both the perpetrators themselves and horrified onlookers, were replayed endlessly, accompanied by debates about cultural sensitivity, personal responsibility, and the importance of respecting national traditions. For the group of five, life as they knew it had changed overnight. In court, the tourists faced stern judges who made it clear that their actions would not be dismissed lightly. Each member of the group was given a chance to speak, and while some expressed genuine remorse, others continued to struggle with accepting full responsibility. One young man stood before the judge, his voice trembling as he apologized. "I didn't understand how serious this was until it was too late," he admitted. "We thought we were just having fun, but now I see how wrong we were. I'm truly sorry." His words seemed heartfelt, and the judge acknowledged his apology, though it didn't exempt him from facing consequences. Another member of the group, however, remained defiant, insisting that their intentions hadn't been malicious. "It wasn't meant to disrespect anyone," she argued, her tone defensive. "People are blowing this way out of proportion." Despite their varying attitudes, the court handed down penalties that reflected the seriousness of the offense. Fines were imposed, community service hours were assigned, and travel restrictions were put in place, barring them from returning to certain countries for a specified period. The message was clear: disrespecting symbols of authority and tradition, especially in foreign lands, would not be tolerated. As they left the courtroom, the weight of their punishments settled heavily on their shoulders. Some appeared visibly shaken, while others maintained a stoic demeanor, perhaps still unwilling to fully confront the gravity of their mistake. Meanwhile, back in London, the Royal Guards became unexpected heroes in the eyes of many. Social media flooded with messages of support, praising their professionalism and restraint during the ordeal. Memes and hashtags like #GuardGoals began circulating, celebrating the unwavering composure displayed by the bound guard and his fellow soldiers. Even late-night talk show hosts joked about the incident, using humor to highlight the absurdity of the prank, while reinforcing the importance of respecting those in uniform. The guards' ability to remain calm under pressure resonated deeply with people around the world, turning them into symbols of dignity and discipline. For the tourists, the aftermath extended beyond legal repercussions. Their families grappled with feelings of embarrassment and disappointment, struggling to reconcile the reckless behavior they saw on screen with the loved ones they thought they knew. Friends stopped reaching out, unsure of what to say or how to react. Online, their social media profiles became battlegrounds of criticism, with strangers leaving scathing comments beneath vacation photos and posts. One photo captioned, "Living our best lives," drew particular ire, with replies like, "Not anymore," and "This is why you don't act without thinking." Overwhelmed by the backlash, most of the group deactivated their accounts, retreating from the digital spotlight they had unwittingly created. As time passed, the incident sparked broader conversations about responsible tourism. Travel bloggers and influencers began sharing tips on how to behave respectfully when visiting foreign countries, emphasizing the importance of understanding local customs and traditions. Schools incorporated discussions about the event into lessons on global citizenship, encouraging students to think critically about their role as visitors in other cultures. Even travel agencies started including reminders in their pre-trip materials, urging clients to approach new experiences with humility and respect. Though the prank had initially seemed like harmless fun, its ripple effects proved far-reaching. For the tourists, it served as a harsh lesson in accountability, a reminder that actions have consequences, no matter where you are in the world. And for everyone else, it reinforced the value of treating others with dignity, whether they wear a uniform or not. As the dust settled, one thing was undeniable: the events outside Buckingham Palace that sunny afternoon would leave an indelible mark on all who witnessed them, and especially on those who had caused them. The incident at Buckingham Palace became more than just a cautionary tale. It turned into a moment of collective reflection for people around the world. In the weeks that followed, the story continued to resonate, sparking conversations about respect, responsibility, and the importance of understanding cultural boundaries. For the tourists involved, it was a lesson they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. But for everyone else, it served as a powerful reminder of how small actions can have big consequences. Buckingham Palace released an official statement addressing the event, emphasizing the significance of the Royal Guards as symbols of tradition and national pride. Our guards represent centuries of history, discipline, and service, the statement read. They are not props or backdrops for entertainment but dedicated individuals who uphold the values of this institution daily. We urge visitors to approach such landmarks with reverence and appreciation. The word struck a chord with many, reinforcing the idea that humor and fun should never come at the expense of someone else's dignity or the integrity of cherished traditions. Social media played a pivotal role in amplifying these lessons. Videos of the prank were shared alongside heartfelt messages from travelers who had visited Buckingham Palace and experienced the awe-inspiring presence of the Royal Guards firsthand. Many recounted moments when they felt humbled standing near the soldiers, marveling at their unwavering dedication despite challenging weather conditions or long hours on duty. These stories painted a vivid picture of what it truly meant to embody professionalism and honor, a stark contrast to the disrespectful behavior displayed by the pranksters. Travel influencers and educators seized the opportunity to promote responsible tourism. Bloggers posted articles titled "How to be a Respectful Traveler" and "Lessons Learned from a Day at Buckingham Palace," offering practical advice for navigating foreign cultures with grace and empathy. Schools incorporated the incident into discussions about global citizenship, encouraging students to think critically about how their actions abroad could impact others. Even travel agencies began including reminders in pre-trip materials, urging clients to immerse themselves in new experiences respectfully. The message was clear. Being a tourist isn't just about sightseeing. It's about fostering mutual understanding and leaving positive impressions wherever you go. For the pranksters themselves, life slowly returned to normal, but not without lasting changes. Some members of the group reportedly channeled their guilt into meaningful action, volunteering at local charities or speaking publicly about the importance of respecting authority figures. Others struggled quietly, haunted by the public shaming and legal fallout. Regardless of their individual paths forward, the experience undoubtedly shaped their perspectives on accountability and personal growth. It was a harsh yet invaluable lesson, one they hoped others wouldn't have to learn the hard way. As time passed, the incident faded from the headlines, but its impact lingered. Tourists visiting Buckingham Palace now approached the Royal Guards with renewed admiration, often pausing to thank them for their service. Families took photos with smiles of genuine appreciation rather than mockery, ensuring their memories honored the spirit of the place. Meanwhile, the Guards continued their duties with the same steadfastness that had earned them worldwide respect, proving once again that true strength lies in composure and resilience. Ultimately, the story of the pranksters tied up a royal guard became a testament to human nature, the capacity for both recklessness and redemption. While the initial act may have been misguided, the aftermath revealed something far greater: the power of reflection, forgiveness, and learning from mistakes. It reminded everyone that even in moments of chaos, there is always room for growth, and that every choice we make has the potential to teach us something valuable about ourselves and the world around us.